avoiding the perspective and demonizing the perspectives of our ancestors is a big part of the mind control. And this is why I focus so much on the human perspective or the ancestral perspective in reference to when flat earth was hitting the scene. Because if you focus more on the so-called science of the not heliocentric universe, that perspective, that approach is easily controllable. The system can easily take that perspective and say, okay, well, if you guys just want to talk about the science, and we can talk about the science. But if you talk about the people and what happened to the people as a result of the mind control and the lying about the universe, and who had the original intelligence about the universe, if you bring that to the surface and make that the focus, that can't be co-opted. That can't be taken over by the system, because that puts the power in the hands and the minds of the people and starts to disassemble mind control. But if you just approach it by the perspective of science, then the people going into this discussion are only going to go so far. They're going to start defending these perspectives, which is exactly what happened from the only science perspective. So when I brought to the table that, yes, the idea of flat earth or the not heliocentric universe exists, but the bigger picture, the bigger perspective behind all of this is a system of mind control. And what are the mind controls, the biggest mind controls out there? We have the mind control of the universe, but we also have the mind control of the people. And then the people who created this illusion. Well, why did they create this illusion? For power. Well, what other mind controls were created for power? Are those two mind controls connected? Of course they are. But see, the easily packageable perspectives approach to the not heliocentric universe is just to say, well, it's just about the science. Just focus on the science. And that's exactly what happened. And that's why entire YouTube channels in the so-called flat earth community really just swept my channel under the rug and didn't look at it. They just dismissed it and said, oh, he's racist, or he's talking too much about racism instead of flat earth, so we shouldn't even talk or listen to him. And that was really fucked up, because there was people who were like trying to be nice, and then all of a sudden when they really get into, or when I really start sharing perspectives that are near and dear to my heart and my people, then now it's all of a sudden not acceptable. And that's bullshit. But that's what happened, and that's still what's happening in many different ways when you talk about information in general. So the institutions of mind control connected to the institution of racism, white supremacy, the institution of heliocentrism. And this goes back, like I said, to the people who are leading these movements. You're going to be limited, like I said in the last video, you're going to be limited by the limitations of the people who are leading the movement. They're going to control the narrative, control the dialogue, and set the tone for the people who are following these people. So you have people following these YouTube channels who are only going to go so far, because the so-called leaders of that movement have only gone so far, and they look up to them. And YouTube is aware, the system is aware of this. So they knew that all they had to do was promote certain perspectives, add fake numbers to certain channels, and keep other channels from getting as much traffic or getting any traffic at all, really. And this is to, like I said in the last video, this is to level the playing field of intellect, of approach to new information, so-called new to us information. Like I said, the whole point of this video is to come from the perspective of this information, all of the stuff that we're sharing. It's either extra because they've added these mind controls, these technologies in modern times, or it's not new because our ancestors were aware of the shit that's going on. So all of this shit is new to us. But what I'm saying is that what is the information that is not new to us? And since it isn't new to a group of people that are still connected to us, what did they do? What were their perspectives of that information? Because that is very helpful to us. You don't want to reinvent the wheel. But if you're going into this information for clout chasing, you will put yourself out there as if you are inventing the wheel, and you won't pay credit to the people who came before you. This is why I have an issue with truthers who just repackage this information out there as if they are saying it all, and they don't pay any respect to the people who came before us who already shared this information, creating all these live streams and talking about this information without any references, without any acknowledgement of the people who had already said what you said. This is why my channel, this is why first I didn't monetize my channel, because I knew I wasn't saying anything that hadn't already been said before. And two, I knew that I was going to be pulling references, video references of people who had already said that information. And if more people would do that, then we would get more confirmations from different angles of information that had already been shared and repackaged and understood. And you wouldn't have people being able to easily just say, oh, well, you're over here, just label you and put you in a corner. But that's not what YouTube wants. YouTube wants people that are easily controllable. They don't want, you can't control individuals who reference libraries of ancestors. You can't control people who just share information that is coming from more sources, because it's not about the person, it's about the sources. But if you have people who are just talking about the information as if they came up with the information, then you can control them. So those are the people that you're going to put out there. So a good reference to this is so-called white people. White people repackage information all the time about everything, stealing inventions, creating the patent office, developing an entire perspective of the universe as if it's new, because it's a new illusion, but having to discredit and dismiss our ancestral perspectives of the universe in order to put themselves out there as the person who discovered it. Look how they put Christopher Columbus out there, discovering America. This is why it's so beneficial for the system to focus on the person of discovery. The so-called white person is the discoverer for humans to discover the new world. And they have zero sources, zero reference. They don't want to do that because they want all the credit. And they will stop at nothing to maintain that credit, to maintain that control, to maintain that idea of being ahead of the pack, because they know if everybody had an equal share of what's going on in so many different ways, they'd be left out because the rhythm is off a little bit. We have a rhythm amongst ourselves and with each other, a micro and a macro with each other, that's just a little bit off. And not saying that there's no rhythm there. It's not like I was saying in the last video about the melanin. Melanin is more complex than just skin. In fact, that's not even a crumb of the melanin perspective that I'm talking about. The internal melanin is what I'm talking about. And if you want to get into the scientific study of it all, there was some study done with Vietnam veterans or Vietnam wounded people that was checking the pineal glands, and the pineal glands of so-called white people were heavily calcified and smaller than more melanated people. That's going to affect your involvement, your engagement in this reality. And you have to see that as a why. Why? Especially as something as important as the pineal gland, what that deals with, the physical and the non-physical. So there are differences here. It's not to look down upon it, but just to say, like, what is going on here? What are we really talking about? What are we really looking at? But if you get your emotions involved and start talking about, oh, well, white people have melanin too, and well, everybody has been enslaved. Everybody's been, when you start getting like that and start to defend something, first of all, you're dismissing the information that we're sharing that talks about the very focused intent to attack our people, which is fucked up, first of all. And secondly, you're not even acknowledging the information that we're bringing to the surface. So you're dismissing us and dismissing the information, because those are two different things. And what happens when those two things happen? Nothing. The conversation just turns into nothing, because now we're back to, oh, we're all the same now. I guess it's about leveling the playing field. You say something about slavery and how fucked up everything is, immediately the field has to be leveled. I was referencing this YouTube channel just recently, and I brought up, some of the stuff that I talk about to a friend of mine, and we were talking about the enslavement and Jim Crow and all this other stuff, and immediately the knee-jerk response was, well, Irish, because it's St. Patrick's Day yesterday, I think it was. immediately the response was, well, Irish people had it pretty bad too, man. And, you know, like that. I mean, this individual meant no harm. Like, it didn't consciously mean to dismiss what I'm talking about. But you see that knee jerk reaction it's heavier than we really give it credit, because it's really fucked up. Because one, automatically this person becomes the victim, their people become the victim when you're talking about a very focused victimization of an entire people for hundreds and hundreds of years. Jim Crow wasn't created for the Irish people. Racism, white supremacy wasn't created for the Irish people. An Irish man or woman could still go out and in the 60s and 70s and own a business and create an empire. This wasn't allowed for us. Even veterans coming back from Vietnam were treated more fucked up. I mean, it didn't matter that you went and fought for and died for your country. You think if a so-called black man and an Irish man came back from Vietnam, they got treated the same? No. And this is this is very recently, within lifetimes of people that are still alive. So to just dismiss it, this knee-jerk response is just to silence the entire discussion. And that's what I'm saying is very dangerous. We have to stop doing this. We have to hold ourselves and other people accountable. The way I hold people accountable is that I just don't even engage in conversations anymore, because it's a waste of my time and energy, because they have work to do, and that's not my responsibility. That's nobody else's responsibility. I'd rather focus my energy with people who are receptive to this information, who are willing to go there. It's not my job to go there. So if people are automatically in that emotional reactive mode, then you have to move on. And that has been really beneficial to me in real life and on the internet. It's just like, okay, well, this is where this person is coming from, so it's not worth anybody's time, because you're not going to get anywhere with them. It's not worth it. So like I said, this perspective, this knee-jerk response, this leveling of the playing field, the avoiding of our ancestors, the recreating history, is to maintain leadership. Because when you recreate history, you're telling the story. So you can write yourself in that story, and you can erase people out of the story. And this is exactly what's happened. This is why real history isn't shared or studied, because they are literally erasing you from the human discussion. Because if your intelligence, if you start talking about, this is why Ancient Aliens is out there, if you start investigating the savages' relationship to the pyramids and Machu Picchu, Sacsayhuaman, all these ancient structures that have incredible intelligence and technology built into them, then you start to give too much credit to the people that you've called savage, that you've written out of history. Now you're responsible for that. Not only are you responsible for writing us out of history, but you're responsible for now investigating why you had to write us out of history and why you wrote yourself into history as you did. So that's going to take away power from you and give power to us. Twice bad for that system. This is why immediately the emotional response and projecting onto us is the main response, even if people are not a part of the elites and all that other stuff. Who holds these elites up on that pedestal? That's the point. How did they get that high? They didn't get there on their own. They climbed on the backs of all these people who believed in their elitist perspectives. This is what racism is. Because once they get to that top, they get privilege from having helped those individuals get to the top. This is what so-called white privilege is. Oh, you helped us as a battalion, as a brigade, as an army. You helped us to get to be elite. Now here's your kickback. We'll redline the system and we'll keep the so-called black people over here and you over there. We'll give you the Homestead Act to help you get land and resources, and they won't be able to get it. We'll give you Indian land and they won't be able to get it. We'll take it from them and give it to you because you're our army. We'll give you a head start. Here's the head right system, and you can do everything that they can't do. We'll give you a head start in society, and as society carries on, we'll keep them down and keep you up. We'll create Jim Crow so we can literally keep them enslaved while they're thinking they're free. We'll adjust the Constitution. We'll amend it. We'll put the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment in there to create this so-called civilian voluntary servitude perspective out there. Yeah, everybody will be so-called enslaved by this system, but you won't be treated as a slave. You'll be, a better way to look at it is that in this voluntary servitude reality, you'll be the house slave with us, the elites, where you won't even really be treated as a house slave, because we'll have the field slaves, the so-called black and brown people, we'll have them do all the work. They'll clean our clothes, they'll wash, they'll farm, they'll do all the things that we don't want to do. As the house slaves, as the house people, we'll have the field class do it all for us. So you won't really be a slave, you'll just be in the suburbs, and the suburbs aren't so bad. You want something to do anyway, and so why don't you just go to work and live in the suburbs? We'll keep them in the ghettos. We'll keep them in a broken education system so they won't be able to challenge your suburban existence. So that's how this mindset maintained its leadership, because the so-called second class of the mind control is allowing it, is keeping these elites on this, so-called elites on this pedestal. And the way they tell this story is another way to maintain that perspective. This is why you always hear this we stuff. We as humans. How could we as humans do this? It's not we. You don't have like Hawaiian people going around the world conquering the land and genociding and cutting people's balls off and putting it in their mouth, cutting people's dicks off and putting it in their mouth, burying babies and kicking babies' heads off with from horses and shit. No, there's a very recognizable difference between in the psyche of the colonizers, people who have colonized the world, the main actors in that in that perspective, and the people who live in a different perspective, in a different way. There's a difference there. So just saying this whole, how could we as humans? No, fuck that. That's on purpose. They're doing that on purpose. That's another way to level the playing field. So it's either we as humans are doing, bad things, or we as humans can't understand certain things. This is what they say all the time when they talk about things that are supernatural or metaphysical. We as human beings just don't have the ability to comprehend what's going on. No, our ancestors have been breaking this shit down for hundreds of years. So we as what's this we shit you talking about? This is how they level the playing field to maintain the dialogue, to maintain control of the narrative, and maintain the velocity of information that's being shared and expanded upon. So specifically in reference to the heliocentric universe, part of this, the metaphysical part of this is to separate you from the universe itself. So racism separated you from humanity. See humanity as like a non-physical manifestation of some badass shit, like some crazy capabilities and all this other stuff. But when you are locked into a physical universe, a dead planet universe, you just become an animal. It's de-evolving you. You're de-evolved into nothing. You're star stuff. You're just a speck of shit in the universe that is a mistake that needs to be evolved into a better thing. And they're using technology, because you can monetize technology. They're using technology to not only control that so-called evolution, but completely steer it off into a different direction. Technology is a physicalizing of the already illusory physical. So when they tell you that the stars are star stuff and you are, I just saw a movie or something somewhere, somebody was saying, yeah, I look up into the stars and I say, hey, like I'm a piece of those stars. My body, the atoms in my body are pieces of those stars. They're physicalizing something when you can see that perspective as non-physical or spiritual. And this is what our ancestors did. You can see the stars, look at the stars from a non-physical perspective. Now you have more responsibility in that relationship, in that connection to the stars. There's no responsibility in reference to atoms and elements that are just the same. Oh, I have the same elements, the atomic elements as the stars. There's no intelligence there. There's no responsibility there. But when you have a responsibility, when you have a spiritual connection, manifestation of the stars, then you have a connection to the sun, a connection to the moon, a connection to the stars, a connection to the so-called planets. This is what astrology starts to get into. This is why when you're born, you have all these character pieces that are very recognizable. They're noticeable. There's a math and there's a science to it. And our ancestors were tapping into this. They have many different examples of ancient astrology that says, oh, well, this person is going to be like this, based upon the stars, based upon the planets, based upon the sun and the moon. We had already broken this shit down hundreds and thousands of years ago, but they have to discover it, so now they have to call it modern, and be in control of it. This is just a way to dismiss us once again. So in the mainstream, in the modern version of it, it's a romanticizing of the physical because they romanticize death, the dead, specifically the dead. Romanticizing the dead keeps you zombified and keeps you looking up to them because they are alive. Because when everything that's comes before you and you now is dead, then the only thing that keeps you alive is the look into the future. And if they control the movement of the future, then they are your gods and they are what you need to be looking up to. And they've used technology to do that. So you look up to technology because you're looking up to the future. They are the evolutionary peak of your entire existence. They are, in a sense, pushing. They're the hand of the God that evolves your experience. The people who are doing the technology, the people that are going to space, all that bullshit. This is why they invented that idea of going to space, to have them over you, the gods in the sky. And then having the International Space Station up there in space, hovering over you like a king on its throne over the masses of people. This is what going to the moon was, and putting their flag on the moon was. That's the throne. It's the conquering. They conquered the people down here, and now they have to conquer the world up there and put the flag. That's what the flag represents. The flag that has our blood on it, sitting on the moon up there, in the minds of the people. And that's the creative power of the mind. That's all they had to do. Put it in the mind of the people, and then it'll become a reality. So they romanticize the stars to elevate the physical at the expense of the spiritual, and then retell the story in a way that is true but isn't true. Oh, we're all star stuff. We're just star stuff. And you see it from the physical. But really, that stuff is very intelligent. It's complex. It's more than just stuff. And our ancestors had broken this down. So it kills the existence, the life of the stars, the life of the light bodies or the planets. It kills the life of the sun and the moon. When they put the sun 93 million miles away and put the moon, just one side of the moon it's dead. It's just been hit by everything, and the other side is dark of the moon. There's like aliens over there, and the sun is gonna explode in 10 billion years, and we should be scared of solar flares and all this shit. Everything is about separating you from it. The moon is dead. The moon is dark. It's got dark aliens. It's just nothing. The sun is a big ball of fire, and it's just going to shoot solar flares and kill the grid here. Your future technology is going to be affected by the exploding sun, and it's far away from you, and it's all about pulling you away. This is why the planets are dead, and they're just gas planets and nothing. To you, they're nothing. Less than nothing. They're dangerous. So when they demonize that, the world that you perceive, then they're, in a sense, in that same way, they're demonizing you as your body, your existence, and your soul itself. What connection that soul has to, or your non-physical has to, this reality and beyond. It also anchors who you are. If you see this whole world in that dead perspective, then the only thing that's living is your physical. And that's why the physical is so worshipped today. The ego, the material, the commercial, all this of the body is just the tippy top peak, because there's nothing else. People have nothing else. And when you worship the physical, you separate yourself from the non-physical. And if you separate yourself from the non-physical, you separate yourself from that real, true evolution, the realizations that come from that, the growth that comes from that non-physical perspective. If you anchor yourself in the physical, you're only going to go as far. The tree is only going to grow as tall. The leaves, the branches are only going to reach as far as the roots allow it. And if the roots are rooted in physical, then you're going to be an adolescent tree for your entire reality. But our ancestors weren't rooting themselves in the physical. We rooted ourselves in the non-physical, in the spirit. This is why we could grow and do things that this system can't even comprehend. We had a relationship with each other and with this earth plane that this system can't even comprehend. So it needed to be demonized in order to develop this orchard of tiny trees, evolutionally stunted tree growth. So this is what heliocentrism was ultimately invented for when you come from the perspective of mind control and control overall. It was designed to anchor this space of non-physical disempowerment, to downgrade, to de-evolve your perspective of reality. Because when you're downgraded, not only does it level the playing field with people who can't get on your level, but it allows those people to not only be on your level, but to be in control of you because you've come down to that level. And eventually, when you downgrade yourself, you start to control yourself and other people. This is what's happening now. Because you've been downgraded into the highest peak is the emotional body. This is why they sell that, human. When they talk about humanity, this coexist bumper sticker of this reality. They talk about humanity and love. That's all emotion based. There's no fire there. There's no spiritual fire there. There's no acknowledgement of ancestral depths. They're selling you emotions, like those damn ASPCA commercials with the song that talks about the angels and the dogs over there with the sad face and shit in their eyes and all hungry, and they're selling you. Humanity is sold to you like that, like an ASPCA commercial, to trigger your emotions, to keep you in that emotional state. Look at what happens when you are convinced that the stars in the universe is just stuff, in comparison to the stars in the universe being manifestations of spiritual power. Look at the perspective there. Look at what happens when you dial into that type of energy in comparison to just being some kind of physical garbage that just happens to be intelligent to some degree now. The biggest thing there is that there's intent. There's a perspective of purpose there that's not there when you are just star stuff shat out of the Big Bang. You have no purpose, and people who have no purpose can be controlled. Another thing that the physical separation does is it maintains the non-physical domain for the God program, to keep it above everybody else. So when you put you as a physical crumb of the Big Bang, then you can sell God, the non-physical God, as higher on this throne above everybody else. This is how heliocentrism and the science community is connected to religions. And this has been like this for years. There's been all the conquering of the land. I was just looking at some historical videos of how California was taken over. They sent in the Padres to set up these missions with their religion. They had the explorers, the soldiers, and the Padres. They were all working together. So there was no separation between church and state. They were all one. So where they were selling these different perspectives to get this different perspectives of people. You get the non-violent people with the Padres, the religion. You get the violent people with the soldiers. And you get the outskirt people with the explorers. And then everybody else is going to fit in somewhere in there. The majority, the bulk of the people is going to fit somewhere in those categories. But the point is that that's the way to physicalize, because the religions were based upon that. The religions were selling you that artificial God on purpose. Once you have that God above everybody else, and you can have that God above everybody else because you're not allowing the people to elevate themselves non-physically. because you can't have regular star stuff garbage people on the same level as God. And this is not the same perspective that our ancestors had. So like I said, once again, when you sell this physical separation, you're selling the throne of this artificial God, this big beard God looking down upon, watching over you. And when they sell that, they're selling that to sell the identity of themselves, selling versions of them, because they act as the God, the big brother that looks down upon you, as the God is looking down upon them. That idea, direct connection between the church and heliocentrism, that idea is to keep you down and more less than God than actual manifestations or pieces of God. It's an entire flipping and reversing of your perspective of reality. This is why I said, when you, like our ancestors, we had this connection, we had this perspective of reality, and it was completely reversed and sold back to us. This is the heart of the real mind control in reference to heliocentrism, the so-called flat earth movement that they didn't want to talk about. They just want to, let's just talk about the science. No. When you talk about this perspective, you're simultaneously empowering the people, but they don't and are interested in that. If you're empowering people, you can't profit off of that empowerment. You can't stand out above everybody else, because then you can commercialize the science of it. So that's really what I wanted to share with this video. The main point was to expand upon the perspectives of why this universe was sold to us from a mind control perspective, and how that relates to the human storyline, the system of racism, white supremacy, the attack on the indigenous peoples around the world, the colonizing of the lands and the people around the world, why that exists, why we're dismissed, and why history is rewritten. It's not just because of some simple little thing. There's a so-called spiritual element to this in separating you from the stars. There's a so-called spiritual element connecting, existing, relating to why this God program is out there, why the church was heavily connected to the conquering of the lands and the reinventing in the way that you perceive reality. So the same way when these conquistadors and these padres with their missions moved in and started saying, oh, indigenous people, this is how you should have a relationship. You should go to church and all this other stuff. The same way that they did that to the indigenous people back then is the same way that the modern civil education system is moving in on the masses of people around the world, telling them how to perceive the universe. Oh, you used to see the universe like this? It used to be flat? No. We have this new science that looks, we have pictures of what the stars in the universe looks like. You need to have a relationship and a perspective of the universe like this. It's the same story. They came in and sold you the Bible back then to start messing with your relationship with the non-physical and the relationship with your ancestors that you have with your ancestors. And they came in and started to sell the heliocentric universe and the education system, the university system, to do the same thing, to double down on that broken foundation. And still, here we are, 7 years since the boom of the so-called flat earth community, the modern version of this information coming to be, and still people are still approaching it on that shallow ass perspective and demonizing perspectives that go harder than that. But it is changing because people are starting to realize what the hell is going on here. And sooner than later, this information will come to the surface.